morning. Welcome to the Hoosier Hillbilly. In some cases, welcome back to the Hoosier Hillbilly. On today's video, we're going to start reassembling my 95 F-150 302 engine. I've spent the last few days getting everything clean. Got the block and crankshaft, camshaft, all that stuff hot tanked. Cleaned all the rocker arms, rods, everything. Got the new rod pressed over onto the piston. So I think I got everything squared away. We've got all my parts ready to start putting this thing back together. So I'm going to get you guys down a little closer here so you can see what I'm doing here. The first thing I'm going to do is put the camshaft back in. And to do that, first thing I'm going to do is flip this engine over. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is get the camshaft put back in here. So I'm going to get you guys lower down here so you can get a little closer look, see what I got going on. Let me just say there's all kinds of different assembly lubes that you can use when assembling an engine for your bearings and all that stuff. There's stuff that's actually designed just for that. Myself, I'm going to use this STP oil treatment. It's good thick stuff that works just fine for doing a job like this. So I'm going to take my camshaft, a nice clean camshaft, which has been sprayed with some lubricant just to keep it from trying to rust or anything. Take a little bit of my STP. I'm going to wipe it around on these journals. Get them all gooped up real good. Okay, so now I've got it right there where it's ready to go in. I'm not going to shove it all the way in just yet. Now that I've got it right there, I'm going to try to drizzle a little bit of this STP right on each one of those journals. Right where it in. Over it. Okay, so there, our camshaft is in. Next thing, as you can see on this truss plate here, tells you back and bottom. So pretty simple, so you know which way it's going to go. Not too hard to figure out anyway, because you got this little port right here that supplies oil through this little groove right there to the front of the camshaft. So pretty simple to figure out. We'll get our bolts in there, and then we'll go get a torque wrench and we'll torque them to the proper specification. Okay, now with that torque down, I'm going to take my new camshaft timing gear, double roller, put it on here, give her a little spin, make sure she's good and free, everything spins fine, so I think we're in good shape there. So we'll go ahead and put our timing mark where it's supposed to be, so the camshaft's already in the right position. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is install the crankshaft. I'm going to wipe out all my journals here before I put my bearings in. Got our brand new Engine Tech main bearings. Now, you're going to want to pay attention with these bearings that you put the tops and the bottoms in the right place, otherwise you're going to have yourself a big problem. What I mean to say here is bottom bearing, got your slot in it, or well, technically your top bearing, engine's upside down. Okay, so you got your top bearing. It's got the groove in it. That's going to line up with the oil holes in the block so that it'll feed the oil to the camshaft. Your bottom bearing, as you can see, no hole in it. Now, just so everybody's aware, these bearings that I'm putting in here are what they call 1-under bearings. They're 0.001 thousandths thicker than the original bearings, because I didn't do anything with the crankshaft, didn't have it turned or anything. So, 180,000 miles on this engine. There's some wear there. This will help close that gap up. Now, the proper thing to do is to buy what they call plastic gauge, and you set your crank in there with your bearings dry, put a little piece of plastic gauge on each one, you put your caps on, you torque them down to specifications, then you remove them, and then you check that plastic gauge. It smashes it and lets you know how much oil clearance you have. And since I don't have any plastic gauge, we're just going to pretend like it's good. So let's start with getting these bearings in the upper part of the engine. Slide them in, line your notches up. Okay. Now we're going to grab our main caps, starting with number 1. Line our notch up with our bearing. Slide the bearing in there. A little more STB. You got it marked right there, number 1, so that's the very first one on here, and it's got an arrow pointing forward, so that's one way you know which way it goes. There's also another way, is your little notch on your bearing, the one on this bearing here and the one on this bearing here, they both go on the same side. You never put them opposite of each other. So put that down on there. going to take a sealer and you're going to put just a little bit right about here where the cap meets where your oil pan gasket will be setting, and the rear main seal will be setting in here. That way it just helps seal everything up, because you got that little bit crack right there. And it don't take much for oil to find a place to get out. So let's get this cap in place. Snug your bolts up with your finger, then you're going to take your rear main seal before you torque this down. Now you don't have to, you can put this in later, it's just a little bit easier to do it now. You're going to take a little bit of your lube, put it on the lip of your seal, the inside lip, not the outside lip, where your crankshaft rotates in there. Then you're going to want to very carefully fit this onto your crankshaft. You start on one side and then you kind of push in on it just a little bit, so you're making it to where it'll not, you don't want that lip to flip over on you. You want it to go evenly all the way around the crankshaft. So you kind of got to work it easily and push in on the lip just a little bit while you're working it. Work it around with your finger and push it in flush with your block and your cap. Tap it down. Now we're going to get our socket and our torque wrench and our specification. We're going to torque all those down. Next, we're going to put on our timing chain and gears. You want to make sure you line your timing marks up. If you don't know how your timing marks are supposed to line up, then you need to look it up, because different ones can line up in different ways. These are pretty cut and dry. You want to line up your crankshaft gear timing mark with the timing mark on the camshaft gear. Got our torque wrench set to 45 foot-pounds. Yep, she spun on me. I'll have to wedge something in here to keep it from spinning over. Okay, that's torqued into place. Now if we put our bolt back in here, now we've got a fully rotating assembly now. Got our crankshaft, got our camshaft, everything's turning. Spin it around a few times. Recheck our timing marks. Make sure everything looks like it's lined up. Everything's dead center. So everything's in good shape. We're going to leave this bolt in there because the next step's going to be putting in the pistons and rod assemblies, and we'll need to be able to turn this over as we're doing that. So, okay, so the next thing we're going to do is get the pistons in here. Now, the first thing you need to do before you put your pistons in is put your piston rings on the pistons. Now, I went ahead off screen and put the rings on all the pistons except for one, so I can go over that with you. Now, when you're getting ready to put your rings on, you've got basically 3 grooves, and the very bottom groove is your oil groove, and just like the way these are packaged, it's got a 3 on there. I don't know if you can see that or not, but so that's telling you that is groove 3. Now there's your oil ring consists of 3 different pieces. Let me pull another packages here. You got this part right here, the wavy part. Okay, now when you install this, as you can see where the 2 ends meet right there, you want those 2 ends up. They want to be pointing up like that. So, and then once you get this in that groove, you've got these 2 real fine little rings here that hold this in place. And when you put them in, you want to stagger the openings a little bit away from where that ring comes together there. So let's just go ahead and put this on here. Okay, so as you can see, I put that to where both those are pointing up as per what they require. And I've got it pretty much right here about center where my wrist pin is. So now I'm going to take this ring, go right in there on the top side of it, work it around, and you can see I put that groove away from that opening there. Then I'm going to put the next one with the groove over here, do the same thing, just start it down on the bottom of that wavy piece, work it around, and it'll fall down into that groove. There you go, you got your oil ring in place. Okay, now next ring is going to be number 2. Okay, with ring 2 and ring 1, you're going to want to look at your ring, and for instance, this ring right here, I doubt you're going to be able to see it, but it says top right there. Okay, that don't mean top groove, because this is the one that goes in the second groove. That means that's the top of towards the top of the piston. So sometimes your rings won't necessarily say top. They might have some sort of marking on them, a little dot or something like that, and that's indicating to you that it needs to go towards the top. Now, when you're putting these rings on, you got to be real careful with them. You don't want to stretch them. You don't want to break them. You don't want to bend them out of shape. So you want to start it in your groove like so, and then lift it up real slightly and work it around, making sure that it don't get caught in your valve reliefs in the piston. And then as you work your way around, you want to push down, get it in the groove a little bit, and down to this last little bit where you got to be careful. You have to push out just a little bit, work it down in there, and then there you go. You got that in there. So now you want this. Where was our? Right there is where our other ring gap went together. So you want to stagger this. I got my gap over here, so when I put the top ring on, I'm going to put the gap of it over here. Because you want to keep all your gaps, not lined up. You want to keep them separated. So now we got ring 1, and ring 1 has no markings on it whatsoever. No dots, nothing that says top, anything like that. So in a case like that, that means it doesn't matter which way the ring goes on, so you just put it on. So like I say, my gap's here, so I'm gonna have this gap over here. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna start it in like that, swing it around, work it down in there, pull it down, and there you go. All three of your rings are in place and ready to be installed. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to dunk them down in what I use is automatic transmission fluid. Why that's what I use, I couldn't tell you. That's just what I've always used. It doesn't have a high lubricating power like oil does, but it still has some lubricating abilities, but it's thin and it flows real good, so it'll work. Next thing you're going to want to do is get you a piston ring compressor. Now there's all kinds of different ring compressors that you can get. This one is a pretty simple one, and you wrap it around your piston, and then you take the other tool that goes into here and you crank it down, and it pulls all those rings in place. Now this, just like any other ring compressor, has little notches like right here where it kind of sticks out on this side. So that's the side you want down up against the block, so it holds the tool in place while you're knocking your piston down in there, because if you put it on backwards, then this could get caught down in between your piston and your cylinder. So before we start to put one in, I just want to remind everybody, just like taking it out, put some rubber caps on the end of your rod bolts. That way you don't nick the crank. That's first and foremost. Second of all, you want to lube your bearings. Now I already got the bearings in place. I'll show you here. Here's our rod bearings. Now this particular type of bearing, now as you can see, there's a little hole in there. Now on this particular rod, these apparently can work on different types of rods. On this particular rod, I don't need to worry about that hole. Now if you had a rod that had a hole in it, then you need to make sure that hole lines up with the upper part of the rod, because some of them have a little hole that shoots through there that the oil pressure will shoot up to the bottom of the piston. But they don't do that on these, so I don't have to worry about that. So we've got these already pre-lubed. That one I was just working on is not pre-lubed, so give us a little bit of our STP. We'll lube them up. Now next thing I'm going to do before I go to putting this piston in there, I'm going to take me a clean microfiber rag here. I'm going to get me a little transmission fluid on it. I'm going to pre-coat this cylinder a little bit. Now, first one I'm going to start with here is cylinder 1. So I'm going to want to make sure I've got cylinder 1, because as I told you before, they're all marked as to which cylinder they came out of. So right here I got number 1. I want to get my piston skirt wet with the transmission fluid. And I'm going to turn it up and let a little bit of that run out. Less mess down here. I've got an old blanket laying on the floor to help soak some of it up. And if you can hear that snuffing, that's my dog Abigail. She smells the critter through the crack in the floor. She'll work on getting it. So what you want to do when you're getting ready to tighten this up, take your tool and you just start turning this in place. You want to check and make sure your rings are all going into the grooves real good, so they're not getting pinched or anything. You don't want nothing. So there, get her good and tight, not too tight, but just enough to compress those rings in. Then we're going to take this. Now there's a notch on the piston. There's either going to be a notch or an arrow pointing forward, something along those lines. That indicates that goes towards the front of the block. So I'm going to be careful getting this down in here and not letting my rod damage the cylinder wall any. Okay, so I've got it started in there, and I'm going to take you can use a hammer like this with a rubber handle on it, or one with a wooden handle, something along those lines. You don't want to use anything like metal or a blunt object that could damage your piston. So then you're going to come around, and I'm going to lift up on my rod just a little bit so nothing's damaging the cylinder, and then I'm going to start tapping it down in there. And just like that, you got the piston down in there. And now set this tool down. Now you want to pick your rod up. And again, watch those crank journals. Make sure after you smacked on that bearing a little, or I mean that piston a little bit, you make sure your bearing's still in place. Make sure it didn't pop out. And just kind of give her some love taps while you're holding that rod in place. And then once she bottoms out, you can take your little rubber caps off. Easier said than done. When you got a bunch of oil on your hands. Then the next thing you're going to do is grab your number 1 cap. Get you a little bit of your lubricant, assembly lube, whatever it is you're using. Grab 2 of your nuts and the ratchet. You're going to line your numbers up on the same side, and you're also going to look and make sure your little tab, just like on the main bearings, tab on this side, the other tab's on that side. The 2 tabs go together on the same side. Now once I get all these in place, I will torque them to the proper specification, but until I do that, I'm just going to lightly snug them up to keep everything in place. And just like that, you've got 1 piston in, out of 8. I'm going to continue on to get the rest of these pistons in here. I'm going to, since I got the block turned this way, instead of turning it back and forth, do it this cylinder, then this cylinder, and that cylinder, I'm just going to run along, do all 4 cylinders here, and then I'll flip it around and do the other ones.
The way it works is it breaks down over time, and if the pH isn't where it should be. Gosh, it's gonna be one of these days. I just do it. We'll maybe weld it back together. But they wasn't paying much attention. I don't think the truck went past.
Okay, now that we got all the pistons in, got everything snugged up, as you've seen, I could rotate it each time, so that's a good thing. As soon as we torque all these down, if we can't rotate it, that's not good, but we should be fine. So the rod bearings on this particular engine torque to 19 to 24 foot-pounds. We're going to set our torque wrench. I like to go to the maximum of that, which is 24. Get every bit of what they allow. And we're just going to go through, torque each one. Okay, as you can see, everything's torqued down, still turns, you know, it's got resistance to it. It's going to have some resistance. You don't want it sloppy. So the next thing I'm going to do, we're going to get ready to be putting the timing cover on, the oil pump, the oil pan, and so the next thing I want to do is go ahead and get my timing marks all lined up so that I've got everything on top dead center when I'm putting the top end together. So get a little bit of stuff cleaned up here so we can move on to the next step.